Welcome to A Fresh Take. I'm Mark Pennell, teacher, pastor of Trinity Church in Metro, Ohio. And we're here to talk about things maybe differently than you've heard before when it comes to Christianity. Well, for instance, the topic today is why on earth would anyone want to be a Christian today at all?
I don't. I'm leaving now. Maybe you're asking that.
Yeah, seriously. Especially when, the other night I was flipping through the channels, doing the channel surfing, mind-numbing stuff, and I got to this one where they were doing their pledge drive, basically. Now, I'm quite used to pledge drives. Where I used to work, we did it. But this was one that really irked me because they were saying, if you give this amount of money, you will have, basically they were translating it, you will have prosperity, financial prosperity. You will do well. If you give us $100, I'll bet you'll get more than $100 back just by being a Christian.
That's, that just, I don't know if you watched our last show, that's transactional. If you do this, God will do that. I'm sorry.
Well, it was very
that drives me nuts. Get a blessing.
Yes, friend. But there's something else that disturbs me is when I read about people that are respected in the Christian community and they fall.
Yes.
I'm telling you, they fall. They end up in the most unbelievable lifestyle behind the scenes that eventually catches up with them. So I guess my bottom line is, if you're not a believer yet, I can understand why you wouldn't want to become a Christian. I didn't like Christians before I became a Christian. I didn't like them at all. So I can understand. It's tough to like us because we do a bad job of representing our Savior, a really bad job. So
what a risk it was of our God, by the way, to have the church or Christians represent him. That's very risky.
Yeah. I would say, God doesn't make mistakes, but
you might rethink that one.
Okay, so why on earth would someone want to become a Christian today?
Okay, let's think through this. There indeed are many barriers. Some are real, like you just mentioned, I think. Some are fabricated. And I think some are just completely made up or imagined. Now, so let's you and I talk about them, right? Because I knew we were going to go here. So you've got, I will call them the money grubbers, mm-hmm. that are always asking for money, and that money somehow is going to be connected to a blessing, and the fallen famous. And there's always a lot of those, and we seem to be in a rash of them right now. So on the one hand, it's real, right? I mean, you saw it. So on the one hand, it's real, and it's really bad PR for an unchurched world to hear all that stuff and to see all that stuff.
Ain't that the truth?
And yet, I would also say it's a little bit of a straw man.
Meaning?
Here's what I mean. Yes, there are those on television or wherever that are constantly asking for money, and it's, and they're used car salesmen.
Right, perfect way, yeah.
And yet, for every one of those, how many thousands of faithful ministries are there that actually do need money, often from their congregation if it's a church? So, okay, we can pick out the few that are abusing it, and we forget the many, 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 many that are faithful. Same with fallen leaders. We can name them, and I won't, but you know who they are. But throughout history, there have been so many leaders that have fallen. And again, straw man. For the few that have fallen, how many faithful Christian leaders are there still? Men and women that faithfully shepherd people, teach the scriptures, love others. So in that sense, I think that's one reason.
They don't get the press, though. The good people.
That's right.
Why should they?
Yeah.
It's the salacious lifestyles of those that, look what they did. It's
and
pretty
part
tough.
of that's the way press is. I mean,
sure.
Dog bites man is not news. Man bites dog is news.
Yeah.
Pastor is faithful is not news.
Yeah.
Pastor is fallen all of a sudden becomes news. Here's another barrier, though, that I think the media, and some of it is really justified, believes that at least the evangelical wing of all of Christendom, of all of Christianity, is totally aligned with right-wing politics.
Oh, very good point.
And so, again, why would someone become a Christian? They think to become a Christian they would have to be of that political ilk.
Oh, yeah.
It's unfortunate in a sense, but again, I think that's a straw man. And here's why. I think it's a straw man because, first of all, not all Christians are right-wing politically.
Right.
Many are, for sure, many are, but not all are. And secondly, people can have their political flavors. That's okay. And so if your pastor or if the Christian people around you are on the right or on the left, who cares? So to just align one with the other and say the two are equal, that's not fair. Now, in some ways, Christians, some have been guilty of that.
I was going to say that.
Where the two, to be a Christian, you've got to be this.
Yes. And align themselves with a particular politician,
right,
who probably isn't quite like them morally, so I say.
Yes. So I hear it. It's a problem. And yet, if you're watching this, I hope you can get past it. If you're not a believer, I hope you can get past it. Jesus wasn't American. Jesus wasn't Republican or Democrat or independent for that matter. And if you are a follower of Christ, think carefully on how you speak, on how you do social media. Think carefully about how you express your political views. Okay, it's okay to express political views, but when you marry them with your faith, that's what becomes confusing to an unbelieving world, to a watching world, right, that makes them say, why should I become a Christian?
Right.
Because I think I have to do that.
Christians oftentimes that are misrepresenting Christ do it out of anger or even pride. Two things that are very dangerous if you're a believer. You should not carry with you pride. It's just, it's the downfall. It's waiting to happen. Mm-hmm. And there's this anger that a lot of people have about, it's us against them. And that's not the way Jesus looked at it.
It's really true. And I think that's part of the answer too. One of the barriers is we don't look very much like Jesus. I think we got to get there. Let me just say one other thing that I think why people have a hard time with, should I become a Christian? And I think it's legitimately who we are. Many Christians, we do have a conservative social ethic,
right,
because we believe the Bible teaches that, whether it comes to marriage or sexuality or gender or right to life stuff. And so that is, in some ways, a lot of, not totally, but it's a lot of the peripheral of evangelical Christianity.
Right.
And quite frankly, we live in a society that is going in a different direction.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
And so that sounds like a bit of a conflict. Now, what I think we need to remember, though, both Christians, I don't know if our society will, we live in a pluralistic society. And in a pluralistic society, we have to be allowed to have conversations.
Right.
And again, we live in a pluralistic secular society. So there's going to be a whole lot of ideas, a whole lot of conversations. And so if any one side, not in the context of a church, but in the context of a pluralistic secular society, if any one side is immovable in not conversing with anybody else that differs from them, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
Now, if that's the Christian, that's a problem. But also, if that's a society, if that's a problem. If a Christian has a particular view about sexuality of one kind or another, all of a sudden he can be completely shut out because that's not where society is anymore.
Right. Marginalized.
Yeah, and so that can be a real problem as well. The emphasis has to be Christ. I mean, ultimately it is.
Imitating Christ, trying to be just like him if we can. And of course, works doesn't do it, and that's a whole different subject in itself, but trying to emulate him as much as possible.
Yeah. Think who Jesus hung around, all kinds of different people, all kinds of down and outers. I mean, he was accused of hanging out with tax collectors and sinners.
I was just reading that the other night.
Great, we should too. Let me give you one more barrier, can I?
Sure.
And I think it's unfortunate stereotypes.
Oh, yeah.
That all Christians are racists. All Christians are anti-woman or anti-science or not intellectual. Now,
you're getting the hairs on the back of my neck out.
Yeah. Now, is there a little bit of truth in those? You bet.
Yeah.
Are some Christians racist? I know some, yes. Are some Christians anti-woman? Yes. What about anti-science? I think so. And I think some are, but not all are. What about anti-intellectual? In some ways, yes. But I also know some very intellectual Christians. I know some Christians who are scientists, who are the most brilliant people I know, that think the world of science, not a God, but still very important. Some Christians, they need to read the scriptures, the New Testament, and see how we uplift women in a society back then when it wasn't.
Yeah.
And then finally, no, there's no room for racism anywhere in society, let alone in the church. But to stereotype Christians that way is unfortunate.
Especially Christians. Christ made all of us, God made all of us equal.
Yes.
In every way. And it infuriates me when I hear anything but that. Mm-hmm. I agree with you.
But the stereotype that we're all that way, that's not fair.
No.
And that can be a barrier for people about what they think to become a Christian, they've got to become those things. And that's just not a fair depiction of who Christians are.
In an interesting point, I think that becoming a Christian, I know for me it was freeing. It allowed me to kind of start with a clean slate about who I was, because I was now born again, as they use. And so therefore I was able to follow him and try to be as much like him as possible. And it allowed me to just kind of blow off all those stereotypes that might have been or had been before. Am I making sense here?
And I think you're turning the corner from what are the barriers to what you were just saying. How should we live?
Yeah. What should we do?
I think we should realize those barriers. But at the same time, okay, who used this phrase first? Keep the main thing the main thing. You remember hearing that?
Sounds like a Yogi Berra.
Yeah, it might have been. And keep the main thing the main thing. What's the main thing? The main thing is Christ, his example. The main thing is love. And I think if Christianity and Christians and the church were known for the main thing, which is the person of Jesus, which was love, if that was true in the church, Mark said, I'm presently pastoring a Trinity church in Mentor. I've said it more than once. I would love for us, and if you go to another church or if you visit a church somewhere, I would love to see churches be 1 Corinthians 13 churches.
And that is?
Love is patient, love is kind, love perseveres, love keeps no records of the wrong. It's that passage you hear at weddings all the time, but it's all about love. And love has so many facets to it that it's a beautiful picture. If a church could be that, yeah, it would change the rhetoric about what Christians and what the church is. Here at Trinity, one of the things that we do, and it's go look at this painting sometime. It's the Van Gogh painting of Starry Night.
Yes.
He painted it from his room, actually, and he was in a hospital.
I was getting close to the end for him.
Yes. Well, actually, it was an insane. He was in a mental hospital.
Right.
And he noticed the landscape, and he decided to paint a picture of what he felt like Europe was going on at the time. I mean, he was the son of a pastor. I don't know if you knew that.
And didn't he try to do ministry among the Welsh?
He tried to be a missionary, and it didn't work. So go look at Starry Night. You know that painting, I'm sure, where the sky has all of those beautiful stars, and then there's the landscape of all of those buildings, and it's dark, it's night, and in all of those buildings, there's a church right in the middle of it. And the key to the painting is to look at that church, and the lights are off. And it's Van Gogh's way of saying, if the world wants to know the existence of God, the light of God, they're going to have to look at the sky. Unfortunately, they can't look at the church because the lights are off. Let's change that. Let's be a church of light. Let's be people who shine the light of Christ everywhere we go.
I'll tell you something, Paul. This subject is one of the most important in my walk because, as I said, I didn't like Christians before I became one, and it's very frustrating to me because I still see reasons why a person wouldn't want to be a Christian. And it's very sad to me because as a Christian, my life changed dramatically. I know that you hear a lot of times, born again. He's born again. What does that mean? Well, we'll get into that some other time. But when you become born again, you see things differently. You see things through Christ's eyes in a way. And that's why racism and sexism and all these other isms shouldn't exist if you're a believer.
Right.
And you shouldn't be, I don't understand why. For one thing, why is it that you always put an A after Lord? Lord. I just had to say that. Anyway, I hope that what you've watched...
We need to change that. Right?
Okay.
By shining that light, by so letting your light shine before people that they glorify your Father in heaven. I think if those who, to answer that question, why would anyone become a Christian? If they can see an institution like the church, and if they can see individuals that are actually contributing love and light and hope to society, like the church has done for generations.
Yes. Very good point.
Hospitals.
Universities.
The Red Cross. That's what the church used to do. And, in the early church in the Roman Empire, they were so taking care of street people that those that were the leaders of the Roman religions were basically saying, these Nazarenes, they called them, the Christ followers, are putting us to shame. Mm-hmm. That's what we ought to be doing. And in a sense, we can. Think about this. We claim to be right to life. We are. And that includes the unborn, but it should also include human trafficking. Yeah. It should include poverty. It should include race. And so when we take the value of life seriously, man, we ought to be leading the way in all of that. You even mentioned the other day, we believe in a God that created everything. We ought to be in the front of the whole ecology stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Our Father made this stuff.
Yes, we were taking a walk on the beach, the lake of, Lake Erie. And we were talking about why is it that we seem to have stepped back with the secular environmentalists taking over. We should be leading the way. We are supposed to be stewards of this beautiful place that he gave us, this incredibly awesome place. And yet we somehow blow it off or find it unimportant or we don't want to be like them. That's a lot of times.
Yeah.
No, that's for those people. And it's really sad. And we end up in our own little enclave.
Our own little ghetto.
Oh, yes, it's very sad. And we get our own language almost. We use words that are important to us, and people outside the church are going, what? What are they saying? And again, that's going to be another subject too we'll touch. But we have to be open and understand there's a group of people out there that don't know their Savior. Yeah. And that should be the most important part of our lives.
Remember what Jesus said, we are to be in the world, not of the world. I think that's a real key to changing the mindset of people of your question. Why would anyone want to be a Christian? If we're in the world, not of the world, and they could see a whole new picture of what a Christ follower is like. A good friend of mine, her kids just joined Boy Scouts.
Oh, neat.
I think it's great. Now, all of a sudden, they're part of a community that are not necessarily a part of the church. You told me you've started reading to children. Is it in the Rotary Club?
Yes.
Think about who you're rubbing shoulders with now. Yeah. People that are not part of the church. They might be not part of any faith whatsoever. That's part of being in the world, not of the world. There's so much we can do, and there's so many things we can change if we're going to change that person's opinion of who the church is and who Christians are. And I think first and foremost, it's to look at our Savior and be like him. His humility.
That's right.
I mean, Christ was on the lookout for the down and outers. Christ was on the lookout for those who were poor and needy. Christ Christ saw people, and we need to see people just for who they are. If you ever read the Gospel of John, in chapter 3, he has a conversation with this highfalutin religious leader, Nicodemus. In chapter 4, he has a conversation with this woman that has had 5 failed marriages. Right. He talks with both of them, and he has a different conversation with both of them. As Christ followers, if we're going to make an impression on people in this world so that they can change their opinion about Christians, we need to look at them. We need to hear them. We need to know them. We need to love them in the name of Christ. I think that's what's going to change.
I don't know how biblical this is, and I'm probably going to get you mad if I'm wrong on this, but I believe to some extent we were born with certain gifts that God gave us, and we squandered them away because we are fallen. We don't use those gifts that were given to us as intently as much as we should, I guess, is the bottom line.
Okay.
And when we become a believer, you get to use those gifts, and God molds you into the person that He wanted you to be in the first place. Am I off base here?
No, I think you're right. And yet, I think we all have gifts. And where the Christian can be different is to use those gifts for the glory of God, for the benefit of other people, and not just for the benefit of themselves.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes, I do.
You love music so much. I'm thinking of Mozart and Salieri.
Okay.
Remember in the
Sure.
Amadeus movie? Mozart, the great musician.
Which was a much more accurate movie than people say.
Is that right?
Yes, it really was.
So Mozart's got this great skill, a young guy. I mean, he's a bit of a cad and a bit of a immature young guy, and so, but his music is fabulous. Salieri, who's a good Catholic man, is so angry because God is using this guy's gifts for his frivolity. Well, I understand that, but if Salieri truly wants to be a faithful Catholic, faithful Christian, he ought to use the gifts that he's got. Instead of being jealous of Mozart, he ought to use his gifts to point toward Christ and to help other people.
I'll tell you, if you don't know, I'm going to go into this thing, and I'm going to sound a little bit like some of the people we were talking about, but the truth is, if you don't know Christ, you're missing out on something unbelievable. I mean, truly unbelievable. Yes. You have no concept now, if you've not taken that step, of what you could be, and it's a lot of times nothing like what you see.
And, can I finish that? And unfortunately, the stereotype and the opinions you might have of Christians, in a sense, it might be accurate of some. Don't judge Christ that way. Jesus Christ was the most perfect person that ever was. He embodied love, and he came and he died on a cross so that we might, our shame might be taken care of, and our distance from God might be taken care of. And that's the Christian message. It's not all of the other superfluous stuff. That's the Christian message. And that, I think, is why someone would want to become a Christian. When they grab hold of who Jesus is, and when they see a picture of that love demonstrated by his followers now and then, I think that is what might make someone want to become a Christian.
Well, that's it for this time. We have a lot more to cover in the weeks and maybe hopefully months ahead. I hope you learned a little something from it, and maybe you have continued questions. We hope to answer those too. Thank you.
See ya.